Welcome to Motivational Humanity. You are not alone. There's a kind of shame that doesn't scream, it whispers, and it's been shaping your life without you even knowing. Shame often begins quietly, almost imperceptibly in the small moments of our lives. It doesn't announce itself with a thunderclap. It slips into the spaces between words, into the pauses of conversation, into the private corners of our minds. It's the voice that whispers, "You're not enough," when you've accomplished something meaningful. It's the weight that sits on your chest when you achieve a milestone and yet feel hollow, undeserving, or unseen. This is the kind of shame that molds the way we interact with the world without our realizing it. It's the shame that teaches us to shrink ourselves, to dim our light, to hide the parts of us that feel fragile, different, or misunderstood. At its core, the shame thrives on invisibility. It survives in silence because we never name it, never give it a shape or a voice. We carry it as if it were a private truth that only belongs to us, as if speaking it would shatter the fragile sense of control we have over our lives. We begin to measure ourselves by impossible standards, comparing our inner struggles to the polished images of other people's lives. We silently ask ourselves why we don't feel proud of our accomplishments, why recognition feels fleeting, or why joy seems tainted by an underlying sense of inadequacy. The struggle is subtle yet profound. It manifests in moments of hesitation, in the anxiety before we speak, in the quiet self-criticism that follows even our smallest mistakes. We are afraid that if anyone knew the inner truth of our self-doubt, they would turn away, that our vulnerability would be met with judgment rather than acceptance. So we hide. We hide our fears, our desires, our mistakes, our ambitions. And in hiding, we unknowingly allow shame to dictate the rhythm of our lives. But awareness begins the shift, recognizing that this quiet voice of inadequacy is not an inherent truth. But a learned story is the first step toward freedom. Every time we notice ourselves shrinking, silencing, or diminishing our experiences, we have an opportunity to pause and name it. Saying to yourself, "This is shame trying to tell me I'm not enough," can be both startling and liberating. It changes the dynamic. Instead of living unconsciously under shame's influence, you begin to see it for what it is, a narrative that can be challenged, questioned, and rewritten. One practical way to start this process is to pay attention to your internal dialogue throughout the day. Journal the moments where you feel small, unworthy, or inadequate. Ask yourself why this feeling arose. Was it a comparison, a fear of judgment, a memory from the past that never fully healed? Simply observing these moments without condemnation is powerful. Another step is to share one small piece of this inner truth with someone you trust. A friend, a partner, or even through anonymous writing. Speaking it aloud, even just once, diminishes its grip and reminds you that you are not alone in carrying this invisible burden. This silent shame is not your fault. It is a human experience that has been learned and reinforced over time. And yet, the more we shine a light on it, the more we reclaim the space in our hearts that belongs to courage, worthiness, and self-compassion. Awareness doesn't erase shame instantly, but it marks the beginning of an inner revolution, a conscious choice to stop letting a quiet voice dictate the boundaries of your life. Shame is not always loud. In fact, the most persistent kind is rarely spoken. It doesn't arrive in a grand, dramatic moment. It seeps in quietly, in the spaces we don't notice, in the small pauses between words, in the subtle hesitations before we act. And what feeds it most is silence. We believe that if no one else sees it, if we never name it, then somehow we can protect ourselves. We carry it like a hidden wound, hoping it won't be discovered, hoping it will eventually fade on its own. But silence is shame's oxygen. The quieter we keep it, the stronger it grows. We learn early that shame is dangerous to show. Perhaps a parent dismissed our feelings, or a teacher criticized us for failing, or a friend laughed at our vulnerability. Over time, these experiences teach us that exposing the tender, imperfect parts of ourselves is unsafe. And so we begin to hide, not just from others, but from ourselves. We pretend, we perform, we sculpt a version of ourselves that we hope will be acceptable, likable, and unbreakable. But underneath the polished exterior, shame whispers, "You are not enough. You are flawed. You are unworthy." The tragedy of shame is that it convinces us to isolate, to feel separate from the human experience of imperfection. It tells us that everyone else has it together while we are the only ones struggling, the only ones who feel flawed. And because we believe this lie, we carry the weight silently, alone, thinking we must endure it privately. Every smile, every accomplishment, every moment of perceived perfection is shadowed by an internal narrative that insists we are deficient. Silence allows shame to control not just our thoughts, but our actions. It makes us second guess ourselves. It makes us cautious, hesitant, unwilling to take risks that could expose us. It shapes the way we communicate, how we show up in relationships, and even how we treat ourselves. We begin to self-edit constantly, curbing our impulses, silencing our desires, and muting our authentic voice. The things we long to say, the boundaries we wish we could set, the feelings we want to express, they all get trapped inside because saying them feels like an invitation for judgment, ridicule, or rejection. Fear and shame are intertwined. Fear keeps us hiding, while shame convinces us that hiding is necessary. We fear being judged, rejected, or abandoned. We fear that if others truly knew our inner struggles, they would withdraw their love or respect. And shame, in turn, whispers that these fears are not only valid, but deserved. It tells us that our imperfections are evidence that we are unworthy, that we don't belong, and that we should keep our struggles secret. And so the cycle continues. We hide, and in hiding, shame grows stronger. Breaking this cycle begins with noticing the patterns, with recognizing when silence is serving shame instead of protection. Awareness is the first step, and it requires courage because it is uncomfortable to face what we have long denied. The moments we feel small, the instant we hesitate to speak, the times we shrink in social situations, these are all clues. They are signals that shame is present, quietly shaping our choices and our sense of self. To notice these patterns is to shine a light into the hidden corners of our experience. And light is the first tool of transformation. Naming shame is powerful. It may feel strange, even frightening, to give voice to a feeling we have carried in silence for years, but speaking it is a radical act of courage. Saying out loud, even if only in private journaling, "This is shame trying to tell me I am not enough," takes away its invisibility and with it, some of its power. When we name it, we acknowledge it, and acknowledgement is the beginning of reclaiming control over our inner narrative. No longer does shame silently run the show. We begin to see it as a force we can challenge. Vulnerability becomes essential in this process. It is tempting to think that vulnerability is risky or weak, but it is, in fact, the antidote to shame. To risk showing our authentic selves, even in small ways, is to refuse the dictates of shame. It is to demonstrate to ourselves and to the world that we are not defined by the quiet voice that insists we are unworthy. Each time we speak our truth, ask for help, express our feelings, or set boundaries, we are exercising a form of emotional courage. And courage, as subtle as it may feel in the moment, gradually erodes shame's grip. Another step in confronting silent shame is connection. Shame thrives in secrecy and isolation, but when we share our experiences with trusted individuals, it loses its potency. Telling someone you trust about a moment of inadequacy, a fear, or a failure is a way to test the lie that shame tells. Often we find that others respond not with judgment, but with empathy, understanding, and sometimes even relief, because many have carried similar hidden burdens. In sharing, we realize that we are not alone, and in this realization, shame begins to lose its claim over us. Practical action also strengthens resilience against shame. Journaling is one tool, allowing us to observe our internal dialogue without judgment. Reflecting on the moments when shame surfaces helps identify triggers and recurring patterns. Another practical step is to practice speaking one small truth aloud each day, whether to a friend, a loved one, or even in front of a mirror. These small acts of courage remind us that the world can handle our imperfection and that our worth does not diminish because we are human. Even tiny acts of vulnerability accumulate, reshaping how we perceive ourselves and how we navigate relationships. It is important to recognize that this process is not linear. Silence and shame may creep back at times. Even as we work toward openness and authenticity, there will be moments of retreat, moments when we revert to hiding or self-criticism. And yet, The very act of noticing this regression is a sign of growth. Each awareness, each decision to speak or connect chips away at the stronghold of shame. The process is gradual, cumulative, and deeply human. There's no rush and there's no shame in the slow unfolding of courage. Ultimately, understanding that silence is what sustains shame changes the way we engage with our inner world. It invites us to break old habits of secrecy and self-judgment, to practice speaking our truths, to connect with others, and to embrace vulnerability as a source of strength. It reminds us that the hidden burden we have carried is not a mark of failure, but a shared human experience. By noticing it, naming it, and bringing it into the light, we take the first real steps toward freedom. We begin to see that we are not defined by the quiet, accusatory voice inside our minds. We are not the sum of the fears, judgments, or inadequacies that have been whispered to us over the years. We are more than our shame, and in this recognition, something profound happens. The silence no longer has the power to shape our lives. Courage begins to fill the spaces where shame once lived. Vulnerability becomes a door, not a threat. And slowly, gently, we remember that we are worthy, not because we have earned it, not because we are perfect, but because our humanity itself is enough. Courage is not the absence of fear, it is the willingness to face fear with an open heart. It begins as a quiet whisper within us, a small nudge that asks us to show up even when we feel uncertain, exposed, or unworthy. It is not about bold, dramatic acts that draw attention. Often, it is in the simple choices we make every day, the choice to speak our truth, to set boundaries, to acknowledge our emotions, or to admit that we do not have it all together. These acts, though small, are powerful. They slowly chip away at the fortress of self-doubt and shame that has built itself around our hearts over time. Fear is the companion of courage. It is always present, a reminder that what we are about to do matters deeply. It may whisper that we are too flawed, too inexperienced, too unworthy, or too vulnerable. It may convince us that speaking our truth will lead to rejection, ridicule, or isolation. And yet, the choice to act despite fear is what separates living fully from merely surviving. Every act of courage, no matter how small, is a declaration that we refuse to let fear dictate the terms of our lives. Vulnerability is the gateway to courage. It is the acknowledgement that we cannot control everything, that life is uncertain, and that our worth is not dependent on perfection. Vulnerability is risky because it exposes us to potential pain, but it is also the path to connection, authenticity, and transformation. When we allow ourselves to be seen as we are, imperfect, uncertain, and human, we begin to cultivate a strength that shame cannot touch. Vulnerability teaches us that courage is not about performing flawlessly. It is about being fully present, even when we are afraid. The inner struggle with courage often lies in our desire for acceptance and validation. We fear that if others see our imperfections, they will withdraw their love or respect. We hesitate to speak up in relationships, to advocate for ourselves at work, or to pursue dreams that feel risky or unconventional. And so we shrink, we silence our voices, and we conform to expectations that do not align with our true selves. In doing so, we sacrifice our authenticity and deny ourselves the chance to live fully. The paradox is that while we shrink to avoid rejection, we also distance ourselves from connection, from joy, and from a sense of purpose. Recognizing this struggle is the first step toward courage. We can begin by observing the moments when fear holds us back. Notice the situations where you hesitate, where your heart races, where your voice falters. These are invitations to examine the beliefs that underpin your fear. Ask yourself, what am I afraid of? What story am I telling myself about my worth, my abilities, or my place in the world? When we confront these beliefs, we begin to see that fear often exaggerates the danger, distorts reality, and magnifies shame. Courage does not eliminate fear. It teaches us to act in spite of it. Practical action strengthens the muscle of courage. One step is to practice small acts of vulnerability each day. This could be sharing a personal feeling with a trusted friend, admitting a mistake, or expressing an opinion that feels risky. These seemingly minor acts accumulate, gradually reshaping our inner narrative and our sense of self. Another practice is to pause before reacting with avoidance or silence. When you feel fear or hesitation, take a deep breath, name the emotion, and choose a courageous response. Over time, these choices build confidence in our ability to face uncertainty with grace. Courage is also about embracing imperfection. We often hold ourselves to impossible standards, believing that only flawless performance will earn us respect or love. But this mindset feeds shame and stifles growth. True courage acknowledges our flaws, mistakes, and vulnerabilities while continuing to move forward. It allows us to take risks, make decisions, and engage with life without the guarantee of success. It reminds us that worthiness is inherent, not earned through achievement or perfection. Connection amplifies courage. When we witness others being brave, it inspires us to be brave as well. Seeing someone else speak their truth, set boundaries, or pursue a dream despite fear reminds us that we are not alone. Courage is contagious. Likewise, sharing our own experiences of vulnerability and risk encourages others to do the same. In this way, courage becomes both personal and communal, a force that strengthens relationships and creates a sense of belonging. The journey of courage is ongoing. It is not a single achievement or a destination we arrive at. It is a daily commitment to show up, to face discomfort, and to honor our values even when it is difficult. Each time we act courageously, we expand the boundaries of what is possible in our lives. We teach ourselves that fear is not a barrier but a compass, pointing us toward the areas where growth, authenticity, and meaning reside. Reflection deepens courage. Take time to notice your responses to fear and discomfort. Ask yourself where you have acted bravely, even in ways that felt small or insignificant. Celebrate these moments and let them remind you that courage is built through practice, patience, and persistence. Recognize that each choice to be vulnerable is a step toward freedom, a step away from the control of shame, and a step toward living a life aligned with your true self. Ultimately, courage is an act of self-respect. It is a refusal to let fear, shame, or the opinions of others dictate the direction of our lives. It is a conscious decision to honor our own values, voice, and authenticity. When we choose courage, we claim the right to exist fully, to express our thoughts and feelings, and to pursue what matters most to us. And in doing so, we cultivate a deep sense of self-worth that no external circumstance can take away. Every act of courage transforms the internal landscape. The whisper of fear becomes a signal, not a command. The urge to hide becomes a choice, not a compulsion. Vulnerability becomes a doorway to connection, creativity, and growth. And the quiet, persistent shame that once dictated our lives begins to lose its power. Courage does not erase fear, but it teaches us that we are stronger, braver, and more capable than we often believe. In living courageously, we discover that the most profound freedom comes not from the absence of fear, but from the willingness to embrace it as part of being human. We learn that the life we long for, the one filled with authenticity, connection, and meaning, is always available when we have the courage to step forward, even when our hearts tremble. And slowly, over time, we come to understand that our capacity to be seen, to be honest, and to take risks is the very thing that allows us to heal, grow, and thrive. Change begins not with external circumstances, but with the stories we tell ourselves. For years, we may have carried a narrative shaped by fear, shame, and self-doubt, believing that the world is against us or that we are inherently flawed. This narrative becomes so familiar that it feels like truth even when it limits our potential, undermines our confidence, or dictates the boundaries of our lives. Rewriting this story requires awareness, courage, and a willingness to sit with discomfort, because change always asks us to confront what we have long avoided. Many of us cling to these stories because they feel safe, even when they harm us. A story that says, I am not enough, I will always fail, or I do not deserve love, may have been passed down, learned, or reinforced over time. It has shaped our perceptions, our decisions, and even the way we relate to others. The difficulty is that these stories often operate quietly beneath conscious thought, guiding behavior and self-perception in ways that feel automatic. Recognizing them is the first step toward transformation, and it requires honesty, reflection, and a willingness to face uncomfortable truths about ourselves. The inner struggle in this process is profound. There is fear in challenging long-held beliefs. There is resistance in questioning the narrative we have relied on for years. We may fear the uncertainty that comes with change or doubt our ability to rewrite a story that feels ingrained. We may wonder if letting go of these old scripts will leave us exposed or vulnerable to disappointment, rejection, or failure. And yet it is precisely in this tension between fear and possibility that transformation begins. Rewriting our story requires reflection and mindfulness. It starts with noticing the patterns of thought that reinforce limitation or shame. When you catch yourself thinking, I can't, or I am not worthy, pause and examine the origin of that thought. Ask yourself, where did this belief come from? Is it a reflection of reality, or is it a story that has been repeated so often I've mistaken it for truth? Journaling can be a powerful tool here. Writing down these beliefs, exploring the evidence for and against them, and considering alternative. Perspectives helps to disentangle fact from fiction and illuminates the areas of life where change is possible. Language itself has immense power in reshaping our internal narrative. The words we use to describe ourselves, our experiences, and our potential directly influence how we feel and act. Replace phrases that reinforce limitation with language that encourages possibility. Instead of I always fail, try I am learning and I grow with each attempt. Instead of I am unworthy, try I am human, deserving of love and respect. Over time, these linguistic shifts begin to rewire how we think, feel, and behave, opening space for hope, courage, and possibility. Action is the next step. Stories are not changed by thought alone. They are transformed through lived experience. Each choice we make that aligns with our new narrative reinforces it and diminishes the old story's power, setting boundaries where we once remained silent, speaking up when we once stayed quiet, pursuing goals that we once believed were impossible. These are the actions that rewrite the internal script. They are tangible evidence that we are capable, worthy, and resilient, and they gradually replace the narrative of limitation with one of possibility. Connection and accountability support this transformation. Change is rarely sustainable in isolation. Sharing our journey with trusted friends, mentors, or communities allows us to test the new story in real life, receive feedback, and find encouragement. Others can reflect back our strength and potential, helping us to see ourselves more clearly than we often can on our own. The shared human experience reminds us that imperfection, struggle, and growth are universal, and it normalizes the courage required to change. Resistance will arise, and it is natural. Old stories cling tightly because they have provided structure, predictability, and a sense of identity, even when they were harmful. You may feel guilt, fear, or self-doubt as you challenge these narratives. You may worry that embracing a new story will make you vulnerable to disappointment or judgment. These feelings are not signs of failure. They are evidence that you're stretching, growing, and stepping into a life that aligns more authentically with who you are meant to be. Leaning into discomfort is the essential ingredient in the alchemy of transformation. Reflection also plays a crucial role in this process. Take time regularly to consider how the new story is influencing your thoughts, emotions, and behavior. Ask yourself, are my actions consistent with the person I want to be? Am I allowing fear or old beliefs to dictate my choices? How am I nurturing self-compassion and resilience in moments of challenge? Reflection deepens self-awareness, strengthens commitment, and helps maintain alignment with the life we are actively creating. Practical exercises can accelerate this change. One approach is to identify one belief that has held you back for years and consciously challenge it each day. Write down evidence that contradicts the old belief, take one action that aligns with the new narrative, and acknowledge your courage in doing so. Another is to create affirmations that reflect your new story, speaking them aloud each morning to remind yourself of your inherent worth, capability, and potential. Over time, these small, consistent practices reshape the subconscious patterns that once reinforced limitation and shame. Ultimately, rewriting the story is about reclaiming agency over your life. It is a declaration that you are no longer bound by the narratives that were imposed, learned, or accepted in silence. It is a commitment to live in alignment with truth, courage, and self-respect. Change is not instantaneous, and the journey is ongoing, but each conscious step forward reaffirms your capacity to grow, to heal, and to live authentically. As we embrace this process, something profound begins to happen. The old narrative loses its grip, and we begin to see ourselves with greater clarity and compassion. We recognize that our worth is not contingent on external approval or achievement. that our mistakes do not define us, and that our potential is not limited by the stories we once believed. Each act of courage, vulnerability, and reflection reinforces the truth that we are capable of living a life that aligns with our values, aspirations, and deepest sense of self. In this transformation, change becomes more than an abstract concept. It becomes a lived reality. We start to act differently, respond differently, and see the world through a lens of possibility rather than limitation. Our relationships deepen as we bring authenticity into connection. Our decisions become bolder, grounded in self-respect rather than fear. And most importantly, we begin to trust ourselves in ways we never thought possible, knowing that the story we are writing today has the power to shape a life of courage, freedom, and fulfillment. Change is not easy, but it is necessary. By confronting the old narratives, challenging their validity, and living in alignment with a new, authentic story, we reclaim ownership of our lives. We step into a space where fear and shame no longer dictate our choices, where vulnerability becomes a source of strength, and where our growth is guided by truth, courage, and self-compassion. Every moment we choose this path, we rewrite our story, not just in words, but in the very way we inhabit the world. Growth begins where shame ends. In the quiet moments when we stop listening to the voice that tells us we are unworthy and start listening to the truth that has always been within us. It is the slow, subtle recognition that we are not defined by our past mistakes, our failures, or the judgments of others. Growth is not an event or a finish line. It is a process, a daily practice of choosing authenticity, self-compassion, and courage over fear, perfection, or approval. It is learning to live fully even when uncertainty or discomfort lingers at the edges of our experience. The journey toward growth is deeply personal, yet profoundly human. We all carry scars, internalized shame, and experiences that have shaped the way we see ourselves. Some of these experiences have taught us to doubt our worth, to shrink, or to hide. But as we move forward, we begin to understand that these scars do not diminish us. They are evidence of survival, resilience, and the capacity to endure. Every challenge we face, every wound we carry becomes material for growth, provided we do not allow shame to define the story of who we are. The inner struggle with growth often involves fear, fear of failure, fear of rejection, fear of what it means to step fully into our potential. It is tempting to cling to what is familiar, even if it limits us. It is easier to stay small, to hide behind pretense, and to let shame dictate our choices. But growth demands a willingness to confront these fears, to step into uncertainty, and to embrace discomfort as a teacher. The path forward is rarely smooth, and yet it is precisely in facing these challenges that we discover the depth of our strength, resilience, and capacity for transformation. Self-worth is at the heart of growth. It is the understanding that our value is inherent, not earned by accomplishments, approval, or external validation. This realization is not something that comes easily or quickly. It is cultivated over time through reflection, practice, and courage. We begin to see that our mistakes do not define us, that vulnerability is not weakness, and that our imperfections are not evidence of inadequacy, but markers of our humanity. Self-worth allows us to act from a place of authenticity rather than fear, to pursue what truly matters, and to engage in life with a sense of possibility rather than limitation. One of the most profound aspects of growth is the ability to rewrite the meaning of past experiences. Events that once caused shame, regret, or self-doubt can be reframed as lessons in resilience, courage, and self-discovery. Pain, while unavoidable, becomes a teacher rather than a sentence. Each time we reflect on what we have endured and acknowledge the strength it took to survive, we reclaim power from experiences that once held us captive. This process transforms not only how we see ourselves, but how we relate to the world, allowing us to approach life with a sense of agency, hope, and intentionality. Practical action is essential in cultivating growth. Growth is not passive. It is built through choices that align with our values, courage, and vision for our lives, setting boundaries that honor our needs, expressing our authentic thoughts and feelings, and pursuing meaningful goals are all tangible ways to embody growth. Each choice reinforces our inherent worth and our capacity to live intentionally rather than reactively. Even small actions, saying no when we mean no, speaking our truth in a challenging conversation, or taking a step toward a personal dream, accumulate over time, reshaping the landscape of our lives. Connection continues to play a vital role. Growth flourishes in the presence of empathy, support, and mutual encouragement. Surrounding ourselves with people who reflect our worth back to us, who honor our vulnerabilities, and who challenge us to expand in healthy ways, strengthens our ability to live courageously. At the same time, growth requires discernment, recognizing when relationships, environments, or patterns no longer serve our well-being and having the courage to step away. Each interaction, whether nurturing or challenging, becomes an opportunity to practice self-respect, resilience, and intentional living. Reflection deepens the process. Taking time to pause, observe, and evaluate our choices allows us to remain aligned with our values and intentions. Asking ourselves what we have learned from challenges, how we responded to fear, and whether we acted in ways that honor our worth strengthens self-awareness and consolidates growth. Journaling, meditation, or simply quiet contemplation can provide the space needed to integrate experiences, recognize progress, and make intentional adjustments. Growth is reinforced when we acknowledge our journey and celebrate even small milestones along the way. There's also a spiritual dimension to growth. It involves trusting that our inherent worth is not contingent on circumstances and that life unfolds in ways that offer lessons, opportunities, and moments of grace, even in struggle. By embracing this perspective, we cultivate patience, acceptance, and resilience. Growth is not rushed. It cannot be forced or manufactured. It unfolds when we allow ourselves to engage fully with life, with courage and authenticity, and when we release the need for external validation or control. Ultimately, growth is freedom. It is the release from the invisible chains of shame, fear, and self-doubt. It is the decision to live in alignment with our values, to pursue our purpose, and to honor the truth of who we are. It allows us to navigate relationships, challenges, and opportunities with integrity, compassion, and confidence. In growth, we discover that the life we desire is not a distant ideal, but a present reality shaped by our choices, courage, and willingness to embrace vulnerability. As we cultivate growth, we also cultivate resilience. Each time we confront fear, act with authenticity, and honor our worth, we strengthen the foundation upon which future growth is built. We learn that setbacks are not failures, but opportunities to deepen understanding, refine strategies, and expand our capacity for courage. Growth transforms our relationship with life, showing us that challenges are not obstacles to avoid, but invitations to engage, learn, and thrive. Finally, growth is love for ourselves in action. It is the decision to prioritize our well-being, honor our needs, and embrace our potential. It is the recognition that we are not defined by shame, fear, or external judgment, but by our choices, resilience, and capacity to live fully. Growth is the living embodiment of courage, vulnerability, and self-worth. It is the quiet but powerful declaration that we are enough, exactly as we are, and that our lives are worthy of authenticity, connection, and joy. In choosing growth, we step fully into life. We leave behind the silent narratives of inadequacy, fear, and shame, and we step into the expansive possibilities of authenticity, courage, and purpose. Growth reminds us that our lives are not determined by our past or by the judgments of others, but by our commitment to act in alignment with our truth. It is in this space, beyond shame and fear, that we discover the freedom to live fully, love deeply, and create meaning that reflects our highest self.